Chapter 5 of The Gods of Mars by Edgar Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Copeland. Corridors of Peril. How long I slept upon the floor of the storeroom I do not know, but it must have been many hours. I was awakened with a start by cries of alarm, and scarce were my eyes opened, nor had I yet sufficiently collected my wits to quite realize where I was, when a fusillade of shots rang out, reverberating through the subterranean corridors in a series of deafening echoes. In an instant I was upon my feet. A dozen lesser thorns confronted us from a large doorway at the opposite end of the storeroom from which we had entered. About me lay the bodies of my companions, with the exception of Thuvia and Tarkas, who, like myself, had been asleep upon the floor, and thus escaped the first raking fire. As I gained my feet, the thorns lowered their wicked rifles, their faces distorted in mingled chagrin, consternation, and alarm. Instantly I rose to the occasion. "What means this?" I cried in tones of fierce anger. "Is Sator Throg to be murdered by his own vassals?" "Have mercy, O master of the 10th cycle," cried one of the fellows, while the others edged toward the doorway as though to attempt a surreptitious escape from the presence of the Mighty One. "Ask them their mission here," whispered Thuvia at my elbow. "What do you here, fellows?" I cried. "Two from the outer world are at large within the dominions of the Thorns. We sought them at the command of the Father of Thorns. One was white with black hair, the other a huge green warrior." And here the fellow cast a suspicious glance toward Tarkas. "Here, then, is one of them," spoke Thuvia, indicating the Thark, "and if you will look upon this dead man by the door, perhaps you will recognize the other. It was left for Sator Throg and his poor slaves to accomplish what the lesser thorns of the guard were unable to do. We have killed one and captured the other. For this had Sator Throg given us our liberty. And now in your stupidity have you come and killed all but myself, and like to have killed the mighty Sator Throg himself." The men looked very sheepish and very scared. "Had they not better throw these bodies to the plantmen and then return to their quarters, O Mighty One?" asked Thuvia of me. "Yes, do as Thuvia bids you," I said. As the men picked up the bodies, I noticed that the one who stooped to gather up the late Sator Throg started as his closer scrutiny fell upon the upturned face, and then the fellow stole a furtive, sneaking glance in my direction from the corner of his eye. That he suspicioned something of the truth I could have sworn, but that it was only a suspicion which he did not dare voice was evidenced by his silence. Again, as he bore the body from the room, he shot a quick but searching glance toward me, and then his eyes fell once more upon the bald and shiny dome of the dead man in his arms. The last fleeting glimpse that I obtained of his profile as he passed from my sight without the chamber revealed a cunning smile of triumph upon his lips. Only Tarkas, Thuvia, and I were left. The fatal marksmanship of the Thorns had snatched from our companions whatever slender chance they had of gaining the perilous freedom of the world without. So soon as the last of the gruesome procession had disappeared, the girl urged us to take up our flight once more. She, too, had noted the questioning attitude of the Thorn who had borne Sator Throg away. "It bodes no good for us, O Prince," she said, "for, even though this fellow dared not chance accusing you in error, there be those above with power sufficient to demand a closer scrutiny, and that, Prince, would indeed prove fatal." I shrugged my shoulders. It seemed that in any event the outcome of our plight must end in death. I was refreshed from my sleep, but still weak from loss of blood. My wounds were painful. No medicinal aid seemed possible. How I longed for the almost miraculous healing power of the strange salves and lotions of the green Martian women. In an hour they would have had me as new. I was discouraged. Never had a feeling of such utter hopelessness come over me in the face of danger. Then the long flowing yellow locks of the holy Thorn, caught by some vagrant draught, blew about my face. Might they not still open the way of freedom? If we acted in time, might we not even yet escape before the general alarm was sounded? We could at least try." "What will the fellow do first, Thuvia?" I asked. "How long will it be before they may return for us?" "He will go directly to the father of Thorns, old Matai Shang. He may have to wait for an audience, but since he is very high among the lesser Thorns, in fact, as a Thorian among them, it will not be long that Matai Shang will keep him waiting. Then, if the father of Thorns puts credence in his story, another hour will see the galleries and chambers, the courts and gardens filled with searchers. What we do then must be done within an hour. What is the best way, Thuvia, the shortest way out of this celestial Hades?" "Straight to the top of the cliffs, Prince," she replied, "and then through the gardens to the inner courts. From there our way will lie within the temples of the Thorns, and across them to the outer court. Then the ramparts. Oh, Prince, it is hopeless. 10,000 warriors could not hew a way to liberty from out this awful place. Since the beginning of time, little by little, stone by stone, have the Thorns been ever adding to the defenses of their stronghold. A continuous line of impregnable fortifications circles the outer slopes of the mountains of oats. Within the temples that lie behind the ramparts, 1,000,000 fighting men are ever ready. The courts and gardens are filled with slaves, with women, and with children. None could go a stone's throw without detection. If there is no other way, Thuvia, why dwell upon the difficulties of this? We must face them." "Can we not better make the attempt after dark?" asked Aristarchus. "There would seem to be no chance by day." "There would be a little better chance by night, but even then the ramparts are well guarded. Possibly better than by day. There are fewer abroad in the courts and gardens, though," said Thuvia. "What is the hour?" I asked. "It was midnight when you released me from my chains," said Thuvia. 2 hours later we reached the storeroom. There you slept for 14 hours. Oh, it must be nearly sundown again. Come, we will go to some nearby window in the cliff and make sure." So saying, she led the way through winding corridors, until at a sudden turn we came upon an opening which overlooked the Valley Dor. At our right the sun was setting, a huge red orb below the western range of oats. A little below us stood the holy Thorn on watch upon his balcony. His scarlet robe of office was pulled tightly about him in anticipation of the cold that comes so suddenly with darkness as the sun sets. So rare is the atmosphere of Mars that it absorbs very little heat from the sun. During the daylight hours it is always extremely hot. At night it is intensely cold. Nor does the thin atmosphere refract the sun's rays or diffuse its light as upon earth. There is no twilight on Mars. When the great orb of day disappears beneath the horizon, the effect is precisely as that of the extinguishing of a single lamp within a chamber. From brilliant light you are plunged without warning into utter darkness. Then the moons come, the mysterious magic moons of Mars, hurtling like monster meteors low across the face of the planet. The declining sun lighted brilliantly the eastern banks of Chorus, the crimson sward, the gorgeous forest. Beneath the trees we saw feeding many herds of plantmen. The adults stood aloft upon their toes and their mighty tails, their talons pruning every available leaf and twig. It was then that I understood the careful trimming of the trees which had led me to form the mistaken idea, when first I opened my eyes upon the grove, that it was the playground of a civilized people. As we watched, our eyes wandered to the rolling ice, which issued from the base of the cliffs beneath us. Presently there emerged from the mountain a canoe laden with lost souls from the outer world. There were a dozen of them. All were of the highly civilized and cultured race of red men who are dominant on Mars. The eyes of the herald upon the balcony beneath us fell upon the doomed party as soon as did ours. He raised his head, and leaning far out over the low rail that rimmed his dizzy perch, voiced the shrill, weird wail that called the demons of this hellish place to the attack. For an instant the brute stood with stiffly erected ears. Then they poured from the grove toward the river's bank, covering the distance with great ungainly leaps. The party had landed, and was standing on the sward as the awful horde came in sight. There was a brief and futile effort of defense, then silence, as the huge repulsive shapes covered the bodies of their victims, and scores of sucking mouths fastened themselves to the flesh of their prey. I turned away in disgust. "Their part is soon over," said Thuvia. "The great white apes get the flesh when the plantmen have drained the arteries. Look, they are coming now." As I turned my eyes in the direction the girl indicated, I saw a dozen of the great white monsters running across the valley toward the river bank. Then the sun went down, and darkness that could almost be felt engulfed us. Thuvia lost no time in getting us toward the corridor which winds back and forth up through the cliffs toward the surface thousands of feet above the level on which we had been. Twice great banths, wandering loose through the galleries, blocked our progress, but in each instance Thuvia spoke a low word of command, and the snarling beasts slunk sullenly away. "If you can dissolve all our obstacles as easily as you master these fierce brutes, I can see no difficulties in our way," I said to the girl, smiling. "How do you do it?" She laughed, and then shuddered. "I do not quite know," she said. "When first I came here, I angered Sator Throg because I repulsed him. He ordered me to be thrown into one of the pits in the inner gardens. It was filled with banths. In my own country I had been accustomed to command. Something in my voice, I do not know what, cowed the beasts as they sprang to attack me. Instead of tearing me to pieces, as Sator Throg had desired, they fawned at my feet. So greatly were Sator Throg and his friends amused by the sight, that they kept me to train and handle the terrible creatures. I know them all by name. There are many of them wandering through these lower regions. They are the scavengers. Many prisoners die here in their chains. The banths solve the problem of sanitation, at least in this respect. In the gardens and temples above, they are kept in pits. The thorns fear them. It is because of the banths that they seldom venture below ground, except as their duties call them." An idea occurred to me, suggested by what Thuvia had just said. "Why not take a number of banths and set them loose before us above ground?" I asked. Thuvia laughed. "It would distract attention from us, I am sure," she said. She commenced calling in a low sing-song voice that was half purr. She continued this as we wound our tedious way through the maze of subterranean passages and chambers. Presently soft padded feet sounded close behind us, and as I turned I saw a pair of great green eyes shining in the dark shadows at our rear. From a diverging tunnel a sinuous, tawny form crept stealthily toward us. Low growls and angry snarls assailed our ears on every side as we hastened on, and one by one the ferocious creatures answered the call of their mistress. She spoke a word to each as it joined us. Like well-schooled terriers, they paced the corridors with us, but I could not help but note the lathering jowls, nor the hungry expressions with which they eyed Tars Tarkas and myself. Soon we were entirely surrounded by some 50 of the brutes. 2 walked close on either side of Thuvia, as guards might walk. The sleek sides of others now and then touched my own naked limbs. It was a strange experience. The almost noiseless passage of naked human feet and padded paws, the golden walls splashed with precious stones, the dim light cast by the tiny radium bulbs set at considerable distances along the roof, the huge maned beasts of prey crowding with low growls about us, the mighty green warrior towering high above us all, myself crowned with the priceless diadem of a holy thorn, and leading the procession the beautiful girl Thuvia. I shall not soon forget it. Presently we approached a great chamber more brightly lighted than the corridors. Thuvia halted us. Quietly she stole toward the entrance and glanced within. Then she motioned us to follow her. The room was filled with specimens of the strange beings that inhabit this underworld, a heterogeneous collection of hybrids, the offspring of the prisoners from the outside world, red and green Martians, and the white race of thorns. Constant confinement below ground had wrought odd freaks upon their skins. They more resemble corpses than living beings. Many are deformed, others maimed, while the majority, Thuvia explained, are sightless. As they lay sprawled about the floor, sometimes overlapping one another, again in heaps of several bodies, they suggested instantly to me the grotesque illustrations that I had seen in copies of Dante's Inferno. And what more fitting comparison? Was this not, indeed, a veritable hell, peopled by lost souls, dead and damned beyond all hope? Picking our way carefully, we threaded a winding path across the chamber, the great banths sniffing hungrily at the tempting prey spread before them in such tantalizing and defenseless profusion. Several times we passed the entrances to other chambers similarly peopled, and twice again we were compelled to cross directly through them. In others were chained prisoners and beasts. "Why is it that we see no thorns?" I asked of Thuvia. "They seldom traverse the underworld at night, for then it is that the great banths prowl the dim corridors seeking their prey. The thorns fear the awful denizens of this cruel and hopeless world that they have fostered and allowed to grow beneath their feet. The prisoners even sometimes turn upon them and rend them. The thorn can never tell from what dark shadow an assassin may spring upon his back. By day it is different. Then the corridors and chambers are filled with guards, passing to and fro. Slaves from the temples above come by hundreds to the granaries and storerooms. All is life then. You did not see it, because I led you not in the beaten tracks, but through the roundabout passages seldom used. Yet it is possible that we may meet a thorn even yet. They do occasionally find it necessary to come here after the sun has set. Because of this I have moved with such great caution." But we reached the upper galleries without detection, and presently Thuvia halted us at the foot of a short steep ascent. "Above us," she said, "is a doorway which opens onto the inner gardens. I have brought you thus far. From here on, for 4 miles to the outer ramparts, our way will be beset by countless dangers. Guards patrol the courts, the temples, the gardens. Every inch of the ramparts themselves is beneath the eye of a sentry. I could not understand the necessity for such an enormous force of armed men about a spot so surrounded by mystery and superstition that not a soul upon Barsoom would have dared to approach it, even had they known its exact location. I questioned Thuvia, asking her what enemies the thorns could fear in their impregnable fortress. We had reached the doorway now, and Thuvia was opening it. "They fear the black pirates of Barsoom, O Prince," she said. "From whom may our first ancestors preserve us." The door swung open. The smell of growing things greeted my nostrils. The cool night air blew against my cheek. The great banths sniffed the unfamiliar odors, and then, with a rush, they broke past us with low growls, swarming across the gardens beneath the lurid light of the nearer moon. Suddenly a great cry arose from the roofs of the temples, a cry of alarm and warning that, taken up from point to point, ran off to the east and to the west, from temple, court, and rampart, until it sounded as a dim echo in the distance. The great Thark's longsword leaped from its scabbard. Thuvia shrank, shuddering, to my side. End of chapter 5. Recording by Thomas Copeland. Of the Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Copeland. The Black Pirates of Barsoom. "What is it?" I asked of the girl. For answer she pointed to the sky. I looked, and there, above us, I saw shadowy bodies flitting hither and thither, high over temple, court, and garden. Almost immediately flashes of light broke from these strange objects. There was a roar of musketry, and then answering flashes and roars from temple and rampart. "The black pirates of Barsoom, O Prince," said Thuvia. In great circles the aircraft of the marauders swept lower and lower toward the defending forces of the Thorns. Volley after volley they vomited upon the temple guards. Volley on volley crashed through the thin air toward the fleeting and elusive flyers. As the pirates swooped closer toward the ground, Thorn soldiery poured from the temples into the gardens and courts. The sight of them in the open brought a score of flyers darting toward us from all directions. The Thorns fired upon them through shields affixed to their rifles, but on, steadily on, came the grim black craft. They were small flyers, for the most part, built for 2 or 3 men. A few larger ones there were, but these kept high aloft, dropping bombs upon the temples from their keel batteries. At length, with a concerted rush, evidently in response to a signal of command, the pirates in our immediate vicinity dashed recklessly to the ground in the very midst of the Thorn soldiery. Scarcely waiting for their craft to touch, the creatures manning them leaped among the Thorns with the fury of demons. Such fighting! Never had I witnessed its like before. I had thought the green Martians the most ferocious warriors in the universe, but the awful abandon with which the black pirates threw themselves upon their foes transcended everything I ever before had seen. Beneath the brilliant light of Mars' 2 glorious moons, the whole scene presented itself in vivid distinctness. The golden-haired, white-skinned Thorns battling with desperate courage in hand-to-hand conflict with their ebony-skinned foemen. Here a little knot of struggling warriors trampled a bed of gorgeous pimalia. There the curved sword of a black man found the heart of a Thorn and left its dead foeman at the foot of a wondrous statue carved from a living ruby. Yonder a dozen Thorns pressed a single pirate back upon a bench of emerald, upon whose iridescent surface a strangely beautiful Barsoomian design was traced out in inlaid diamonds. A little to one side stood Thuvia, the Thark, and I. The tide of battle had not reached us, but the fighters from time to time swung close enough that we might distinctly note them. The black pirates interested me immensely. I had heard vague rumors, little more than legends they were, during my former life on Mars, but never had I seen them, nor talked with one who had. They were popularly supposed to inhabit the lesser moon, from which they descended upon Barsoom at long intervals. Where they visited, they wrought the most horrible atrocities, and when they left, carried away with them firearms and ammunition, and young girls as prisoners. These latter, the rumor had it, they sacrificed to some terrible god in an orgy which ended in the eating of their victims. I had an excellent opportunity to examine them, as the strife occasionally brought now one and now another close to where I stood. They were large men, possibly 6 feet and over in height. Their features were clear-cut and handsome in the extreme. Their eyes were well set and large, though a slight narrowness lent them a crafty appearance. The iris, as well as I could determine by moonlight, was of extreme blackness, while the eyeball itself was quite white and clear. The physical structure of their bodies seemed identical with those of the Thorns, the red men, and my own. Only in the color of their skin did they differ materially from us. That is of the appearance of polished ebony, and, odd as it may seem for a Southerner to say it, adds to, rather than detracts from, their marvelous beauty. But if their bodies are divine, their hearts, apparently, are quite the reverse. Never did I witness such a malign lust for blood as these demons of the outer air evinced in their mad battle with the Thorns. All about us in the garden lay their sinister craft, which the Thorns, for some reason, then unaccountable to me, made no effort to injure. Now and again a black warrior would rush from a nearby temple, bearing a young woman in his arms. Straight for his flyer he would leap, while those of his comrades who fought nearby would rush to cover his escape. The Thorns, on their side, would hasten to rescue the girl, and in an instant the two would be swallowed in the vortex of a maelstrom of yelling devils, hacking and hewing at one another like fiends incarnate. But always, it seemed, were the black pirates of Barsoom victorious, and the girl, brought miraculously unharmed through the conflict, borne away into the outer darkness upon the deck of a swift flyer. Fighting, similar to that which surrounded us, could be heard in both directions as far as sound carried, and Thuvia told me that the attacks of the black pirates were usually made simultaneously along the entire ribbon-like domain of the Thorns, which circles the Valley Dor on the outer slopes of the mountains of Oates. As the fighting receded from our position for a moment, Thuvia turned toward me with a question. "Do you understand now, O Prince," she said, "why 1,000,000 warriors guard the domains of the Holy Thorns by day and by night? The scene you are witnessing now is but a repetition of what I have seen enacted a score of times during the 15 years I have been a prisoner here. From time immemorial, the black pirates of Barsoom have preyed upon the Holy Thorns. Yet they never carry their expeditions to a point, as one might readily believe it was in their power to do, where the extermination of the race of Thorns is threatened. It is as though they but utilized the race as playthings, with which they satisfy their ferocious lust for fighting, and from whom they collect toll in arms and ammunition, and in prisoners." "Why don't they jump in and destroy these flyers?" I asked. "That would soon put a stop to the attacks, or at least the blacks would scarce be so bold." "Why, see how perfectly unguarded they leave their craft, as though they were lying safe in their own hangars at home. The Thorns do not dare. They tried it once, ages ago, but the next night, and for a whole moon thereafter, 1,000 great black battleships circled the mountains of Oates, pouring tons of projectiles upon the temples, the gardens, and the courts, until every Thorn who was not killed was driven for safety into the subterranean galleries. The Thorns know that they live at all only by the sufferance of the black men. They were near to extermination that once, and they will not venture risking it again." As she ceased talking, a new element was instilled into the conflict. It came from a source equally unlooked for by either Thorn or pirate. The great banths which we had liberated in the garden had evidently been awed at first by the sound of the battle, the yelling of the warriors, and the loud report of rifle and bomb. But now they must have become angered by the continuous noise, and excited by the smell of new blood. For all of a sudden a great form shot from a clump of low shrubbery into the midst of a struggling mass of humanity. A horrid scream of bestial rage broke from the banth as he felt warm flesh beneath his powerful talons. As though his cry was but a signal to the others, the entire great pack hurled themselves among the fighters. Panic reigned in an instant. Thorn and black man turned alike against the common enemy, for the banths showed no partiality toward either. The awful beasts bore down 100 men by the mere weight of their great bodies as they hurled themselves into the thick of the fight. Leaping and clawing, they mowed down the warriors with their powerful paws, turning for an instant to rend their victims with frightful fangs. The scene was fascinating in its terribleness, but suddenly it came to me that we were wasting valuable time watching this conflict, which in itself might prove a means of our escape. The Thorns were so enraged with their terrible assailants that now, if ever, escape should be comparatively easy. I turned to search for an opening through the contending hordes. If we could but reach the ramparts, we might find that the pirates somewhere had thinned the guarding forces and left a way open to us to the world without. As my eyes wandered about the garden, the sight of the hundreds of aircraft lying unguarded around us suggested the simplest avenue to freedom. Why it had not occurred to me before! I was thoroughly familiar with the mechanism of every known make of flyer on Barsoom. For 9 years I had sailed and fought with the navy of Helium. I had raced through space on the tiny one-man air scout, and I had commanded the greatest battleship that ever had floated in the thin air of dying Mars. To think, with me, is to act. Grasping Thuvia by the arm, I whispered to Tars Tarkas to follow me. Quickly we glided toward a small flyer which lay furthest from the battling warriors. Another instant found us huddled on the tiny deck. My hand was on the starting lever. I pressed my thumb upon the button which controls the ray of repulsion,
that splendid discovery of the Martians, which permits them to navigate the thin atmosphere of their planet in huge ships that dwarf the dreadnoughts of our earthly navies into pitiful insignificance. The craft swayed slightly, but she did not move. Then a new cry of warning broke upon our ears. Turning, I saw a dozen black pirates dashing toward us from the melee. We had been discovered. With shrieks of rage, the demons sprang for us. With frenzied insistence, I continued to press the little button which should have sent us racing out into space, but still the vessel refused to budge. Then it came to me, the reason that she would not rise. We had stumbled upon a two-man flyer. Its ray tanks were charged only with sufficient repulsive energy to lift two ordinary men. The Thark's great weight was anchoring us to our doom. The blacks were nearly upon us. There was not an instant to be lost in hesitation or doubt. I pressed the button far in and locked it. Then I set the lever at high speed, and, as the blacks came yelling upon us, I slipped from the craft's deck, and with drawn longsword met the attack. At the same moment, a girl's shriek rang out behind me, and an instant later, as the blacks fell upon me, I heard far above my head, and faintly, in Thuvia's voice, "My prince, oh my prince! I would rather remain and die with—" But the rest was lost in the noise of my assailants. I knew, though, that my ruse had worked, and that temporarily at least Thuvia and Targus were safe, and the means of escape was theirs. For a moment it seemed that I could not withstand the weight of numbers that confronted me, but again, as on so many other occasions when I had been called upon to face fearful odds upon this planet of warriors and fierce beasts, I found that my earthly strength so far transcended that of my opponents, that the odds were not so greatly against me as they appeared. My seething blade wove a net of death about me. For an instant the blacks pressed close to reach me with their shorter swords, but presently they gave back, and the esteem in which they suddenly had learned to hold my sword arm was writ large upon each countenance. I knew, though, that it was but a question of minutes before their greater numbers would wear me down, or get around my guard. I must go down eventually to certain death before them. I shuddered at the thought of it, dying thus in this terrible place, where no word of my end could ever reach my Dejathoras, dying at the hands of nameless black men in the gardens of the cruel thorns. Then my old-time spirit reasserted itself. The fighting blood of my Virginian sires coursed hot through my veins. The fierce bloodlust and the joy of battle surged over me. The fighting smile, that has brought consternation to 1,000 foemen, touched my lips. I put the thought of death out of my mind, and fell upon my antagonists with fury that those who escaped will remember to their dying day. That others would press to the support of those who faced me, I knew, so even as I fought, I kept my wits at work, searching for an avenue of escape. It came from an unexpected quarter, out of the black night behind me. I had just disarmed a huge fellow who had given me a desperate struggle, and for a moment the blacks stood back for a breathing spell. They eyed me with malignant fury, yet withal there was a touch of respect in their demeanor. "Thurn," said one, "you fight like a dator. But for your detestable yellow hair and your white skin, you would be an honor to the firstborn of Barsoom." "I am no Thurn," I said, and was about to explain that I was from another world, thinking that by patching a truce with these fellows and fighting with them against the Thurns, I might enlist their aid in regaining my liberty. But just at that moment a heavy object smote me a resounding whack between my shoulders that nearly felled me to the ground. As I turned to meet this new enemy, an object passed over my shoulder, striking one of my assailants squarely in the face and knocking him senseless to the sward. At the same instant I saw that the thing that had struck us was the trailing anchor of a rather fair-sized air vessel, possibly a 10-man cruiser. The ship was floating slowly above us, not more than 50 feet over our heads. Instantly, the one chance for escape that it offered presented itself to me. The vessel was slowly rising, and now the anchor was beyond the blacks who faced me, and several feet above their heads. With a bound that left them gaping in wide-eyed astonishment, I sprang completely over them. A second leap carried me just high enough to grasp the now rapidly receding anchor. But I was successful, and there I hung by one hand, dragging through the branches of the higher vegetation of the gardens, while my late foeman shrieked and howled beneath me. Presently the vessel veered toward the west, and then swung gracefully to the south. In another instant I was carried beyond the crest of the golden cliffs, out over the Valley Dor, where 6,000 feet below me the lost sea of Chorus lay shimmering in the moonlight. Carefully I climbed to a sitting posture across the anchor's arms. I wondered if by chance the vessel might be deserted. I hoped so. Or possibly it might belong to a friendly people, and have wandered by accident almost within the clutches of the pirates and the thorns. The fact that it was retreating from the scene of battle lent color to this hypothesis. But I decided to know positively, and at once. So, with the greatest caution, I commenced to climb slowly up the anchor chain toward the deck above me. One hand had just reached for the vessel's rail and found it, when a fierce black face was thrust over the side, and eyes filled with triumphant hate looked into mine.
End of chapter 6. Recording by Thomas Copeland. Of the Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Copeland.
A fair goddess. For an instant the black pirate and I remained motionless, glaring into each other's eyes. Then a grim smile curled the handsome lips above me, as an ebony hand came slowly in sight from above the edge of the deck, and the cold, hollow eye of a revolver sought the center of my forehead. Simultaneously my free hand shot out for the black throat, just within reach, and the ebony finger tightened on the trigger. The pirate's hissing, "Die, cursed thorn," was half choked in his windpipe by my clutching fingers. The hammer fell with a futile click upon an empty chamber. Before he could fire again, I had pulled him so far over the edge of the deck that he was forced to drop his firearm and clutch the rail with both hands. My grasp upon his throat effectually prevented any outcry, and so we struggled in grim silence. He to tear away from my hold, I to drag him over to his death. His face was taking on a livid hue, his eyes were bulging from their sockets. It was evident to him that he soon must die unless he tore loose from the steel fingers that were choking the life from him. With a final effort, he threw himself further back upon the deck, at the same instant releasing his hold upon the rail to tear frantically with both hands at my fingers in an effort to drag them from his throat. That little second was all that I awaited. With one mighty downward surge, I swept him clear of the deck. His falling body came near to tearing me from the frail hold that my single free hand had upon the anchor chain, and plunging me with him to the waters of the sea below. I did not relinquish my grasp upon him, however, for I knew that a single shriek from those lips as he hurtled to his death in the silent waters of the sea would bring his comrades from above to avenge him. Instead, I held grimly to him, choking, ever choking, while his frantic struggles dragged me lower and lower toward the end of the chain. Gradually his contortions became spasmodic, lessening by degrees until they ceased entirely. Then I released my hold upon him, and in an instant he was swallowed by the black shadows far below. Again I climbed to the ship's rail. This time I succeeded in raising my eyes to the level of the deck, where I could take a careful survey of the conditions immediately confronting me. The nearer moon had passed below the horizon, but the clear effulgence of the further satellite bathed the deck of the cruiser, bringing into sharp relief the bodies of 6 or 8 black men sprawled about in sleep. Huddled close to the base of a rapid-fire gun was a young white girl securely bound. Her eyes were widespread in an expression of horrified anticipation, and fixed directly upon me, as I came in sight above the edge of the deck. Unutterable relief instantly filled them, as they fell upon the mystic jewel which sparkled in the center of my stolen headpiece. She did not speak. Instead, her eyes warned me to beware of the sleeping figures that surrounded her. Noiselessly I gained the deck. The girl nodded to me to approach her. As I bent low, she whispered to me to release her. "I can aid you," she said, "and you will need all the aid available when they awaken." "Some of them will awake in chorus," I replied, smiling. She caught the meaning of my words, and the cruelty of her answering smile horrified me. One is not astonished by cruelty in a hideous face, but when it touches the features of a goddess whose fine chiseled lineaments might more fittingly portray love and beauty, the contrast is appalling. Quickly I released her. "Give me a revolver," she whispered. "I can use that upon those your sword does not silence in time." I did as she bid. Then I turned toward the distasteful work that lay before me. This was no time for fine compunctions, nor for a chivalry that these cruel demons would neither appreciate nor reciprocate. Stealthily I approached the nearest sleeper. When he awoke, he was well on his journey to the bosom of Chorus. His piercing shriek, as consciousness returned to him, came faintly up to us from the black depths beneath. The second awoke as I touched him, and though I succeeded in hurling him from the cruiser's deck, his wild cry of alarm brought the remaining pirates to their feet. There were 5 of them. As they arose, the girl's revolver spoke in sharp staccato, and one sank back to the deck again, to rise no more. The others rushed madly upon me with drawn swords. The girl evidently dared not fire for fear of wounding me, but I saw her sneak stealthily and cat-like toward the flank of the attackers. Then they were on me. For a few minutes I experienced some of the hottest fighting I had ever passed through. The quarters were too small for footwork. It was stand your ground and give and take. At first I took considerably more than I gave, but presently I got beneath one fellow's guard and had the satisfaction of seeing him collapse upon the deck. The others redoubled their efforts. The crashing of their blades upon mine raised a terrific din that might have been heard for miles through the silent night. Sparks flew as steel smote steel, and then there was the dull and sickening sound of a shoulder bone parting beneath the keen edge of my Martian sword. 3 now faced me, but the girl was working her way to a point that would soon permit her to reduce the number by 1 at least. Then things happened with such amazing rapidity that I can scarce comprehend even now all that took place in that brief instant. The 3 rushed me with the evident purpose of forcing me back the few steps that would carry my body over the rail into the void below. At the same instant the girl fired, and my sword arm made 2 moves. One man dropped with a bullet in his brain. A sword flew clattering across the deck and dropped over the edge beyond as I disarmed one of my opponents, and the third went down with my blade buried to the hilt in his breast, and 3 feet of it protruding from his back, and falling, wrenched the sword from my grasp. Disarmed myself, I now faced my remaining foeman, whose own sword lay somewhere thousands of feet below us, lost in the lost sea. The new conditions seemed to please my adversary, for a smile of satisfaction bared his gleaming teeth as he rushed at me bare-handed. The great muscles which rolled beneath his glossy black hide evidently assured him that here was easy prey, not worth the trouble of drawing the dagger from his harness. I let him come almost upon me. Then I ducked beneath his outstretched arms, at the same time sidestepping to the right. Pivoting on my left toe, I swung a terrific right to his jaw, and, like a felled ox, he dropped in his tracks. A low, silvery laugh rang out behind me. "You are no Thurn," said the sweet voice of my companion, "for all your golden locks, or the harness of Sator Throg. Never lived there upon all Barsoom before one who could fight as you have fought this night. Who are you?" I am John Carter, Prince of the House of Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium, I replied. And whom, I added, has the honor of serving been accorded me? She hesitated a moment before speaking. Then she asked, You are no Thurn. Are you an enemy of the Thurns? I have been in the territory of the Thurns for a day and a half. During that entire time my life has been in constant danger. I have been harassed and persecuted. Armed men and fierce beasts have been set upon me. I had no quarrel with the Thurns before, but can you wonder that I feel no great love for them now? I have spoken. She looked at me intently for several minutes before she replied. It was as though she were attempting to read my inmost soul, to judge my character and my standards of chivalry in that long-drawn, searching gaze. Apparently the inventory satisfied her. I am Fedor, daughter of Matai Shang, holy Hecador of the Holy Thurns, father of Thurns, master of life and death upon Barsoom, brother of Isis, prince of life eternal. At that moment I noticed that the black I had dropped with my fist was commencing to show signs of returning consciousness. I sprang to his side. Stripping his harness from him, I securely bound his hands behind his back, and, after similarly fastening his feet, tied him to a heavy gun carriage. Why not the simpler way? Asked Fedor. I do not understand. What simpler way? I replied. With a slight shrug of her lovely shoulders, she made a gesture with her hands, personating the casting of something over the craft's side. I am no murderer, I said. I kill in self-defense only. She looked at me narrowly. Then she puckered those divine brows of hers and shook her head. She could not comprehend. Well, neither had my own Dejathoras been able to understand what to her had seemed a foolish and dangerous policy toward enemies. Upon Barsoom, quarter is neither asked nor given, and each dead man means so much more of the waning resources of this dying planet to be divided amongst those who survive. But there seemed a subtle difference here between the manner in which this girl contemplated the dispatching of an enemy and the tender-hearted regret of my own princess for the stern necessity which demanded it. I think that Fedor regretted the thrill that the spectacle would have afforded her, rather than the fact that my decision left another enemy alive to threaten us. The man had now regained full possession of his faculties, and was regarding us intently from where he lay bound upon the deck. He was a handsome fellow, clean-limbed and powerful, with an intelligent face and features of such exquisite chiseling that Adonis himself might have envied him. The vessel, unguided, had been moving slowly across the valley, but now I thought it time to take the helm and direct her course. Only in a very general way could I guess the location of the Valley Dor. That it was far south of the equator was evident from the constellations, but I was not sufficiently a Martian astronomer to come much closer than a rough guess without the splendid charts and delicate instruments with which, as an officer of the Heliumite Navy, I had formerly reckoned the positions of the vessels on which I sailed. That a northerly course would quickest lead me toward the more settled portions of the planet immediately decided the direction that I should steer. Beneath my hand the cruiser swung gracefully about. Then the button which controlled the repulsive rays sent us soaring far out into space. With speed lever pulled to the last notch, we raced toward the north as we rose ever farther and farther above the terrible valley of death. As we passed at a dizzy height over the narrow domains of the Thurns, the flash of powder far below bore mute witness to the ferocity of the battle that still raged along that cruel frontier. No sound of conflict reached our ears, for in the rarefied atmosphere of our great altitude no sound wave could penetrate. They were dissipated in thin air far below us. It became intensely cold. Breathing was difficult. The girl, Fedor, and the black pirate kept their eyes glued upon me. At last the girl spoke. "Unconsciousness comes quickly at this altitude," she said quietly. "Unless you are inviting death for us all, you had best drop, and that quickly." There was no fear in her voice. It was as one might say, "You had better carry an umbrella. It is going to rain." I dropped the vessel quickly to a lower level. Nor was I a moment too soon. The girl had swooned. The black, too, was unconscious, while I myself retained my senses, I think, only by sheer will. The one on whom all responsibility rests is apt to endure the most. We were swinging along low above the foothills of the Oats. It was comparatively warm, and there was plenty of air for our starved lungs, so I was not surprised to see the black open his eyes, and a moment later the girl also. "It was a close call," she said. "It has taught me two things, though," I replied. "What?" "That even Fedor, daughter of the master of life and death, is mortal," I said, smiling. "There is immortality only in Isis," she replied, "and Isis is for the race of thorns alone. Thus am I immortal." I caught a fleeting grin passing across the features of the black man as he heard her words. I did not then understand why he smiled. Later I was to learn, and she too, in a most horrible manner. "If the other thing you have just learned," she continued, "has led to as erroneous deductions as the first, you are little richer in knowledge than you were before." "The other," I replied, "is that our dusky friend here does not hail from the nearer moon. He was like to have died at a few thousand feet above Barsoom. Had we continued the 5,000 miles that lie between Thuria and the planet, he would have been but the frozen memory of a man." Fedor looked at the black in evident astonishment. "If you are not of Thuria, then where?" she asked. He shrugged his shoulders and turned his eyes elsewhere, but did not reply. The girl stamped her little foot in a peremptory manner. "The daughter of Matai Shang is not accustomed to having her queries remain unanswered," she said. "One of the lesser breed should feel honored that a member of the holy race that was born to inherit life eternal should deign even to notice him." Again the black smiled that wicked, knowing smile. "Zodar, daughter of the firstborn of Barsoom, is accustomed to give commands, not to receive them," replied the black pirate. Then, turning to me, "What are your intentions concerning me?" "I intend taking you both back to Helium," I said. "No harm will come to you. You will find the red men of Helium a kindly and magnanimous race, but if they listen to me, there will be no more voluntary pilgrimages down the River Iss, and the impossible belief that they have cherished for ages will be shattered into 1,000 pieces." "Are you of Helium?" he asked. "I am a prince of the house of Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium," I replied. "But I am not of Barsoom. I am of another world." Zodar looked at me intently for a few moments. "I can well believe that you are not of Barsoom," he said at length. "None of this world could have bested 8 of the firstborn single-handed. But how is it that you wear the golden hair and the jeweled circlet of a holy thorn?" He emphasized the word holy with a touch of irony. "I had forgotten them," I said. "They are the spoils of conquest." And with a sweep of my hand I removed the disguise from my head. When the black's eyes fell on my close-cropped black hair, they opened in astonishment. Evidently he had looked for the bald pate of a thorn. "You are indeed of another world," he said, a touch of awe in his voice. "With the skin of a thorn, the black hair of the firstborn, and the muscles of a dozen daughters, it was no disgrace even for Zotar to acknowledge your supremacy. A thing he could never do were you a Barsoomian," he added. "You are traveling several laps ahead of me, my friend," I interrupted. "I glean that your name is Zodar. But whom, pray, are the firstborn, and what a dator? And why, if you were conquered by a Barsoomian, could you not acknowledge it?" "The firstborn of Barsoom," he explained, "are the race of black men, of which I am a dator, or, as the lesser Barsoomians would say, prince. My race is the oldest on the planet. We trace our lineage, unbroken, direct to the tree of life, which flourished in the center of the Valley Dor 23 million years ago. For countless ages, the fruit of this tree underwent the gradual changes of evolution, passing by degrees from true plant life to a combination of plant and animal. In the first stages, the fruit of the tree possessed only the power of independent muscular action, while the stem remained attached to the parent plant. Later, a brain developed in the fruit, so that, hanging there by their long stems, they thought and moved as individuals. Then, with the development of perceptions, came a comparison of them. Judgments were reached and compared, and thus reason and the power to reason were born upon Barsoom. Ages passed. Many forms of life came and went upon the tree of life, but still all were attached to the parent plant by stems of varying lengths. At length the fruit tree consisted in tiny plantmen, such as we now see reproduced in such huge dimensions in the Valley Dor, but still hanging to the limbs and branches of the tree by the stems which grew from the tops of their heads. The buds from which the plantmen blossomed resembled large nuts about a foot in diameter, divided by double partition walls into 4 sections. In one section grew the plantman, in another a 16-legged worm, in the third the progenitor of the white ape, and in the fourth the primeval black man of Barsoom. When the bud burst, the plantman remained dangling at the end of his stem, but the 3 other sections fell to the ground, where the efforts of their imprisoned occupants to escape sent them hopping about in all directions. Thus, as time went on, all Barsoom was covered with these imprisoned creatures. For countless ages they lived their long lives within their hard shells, hopping and skipping about the broad planet, falling into rivers, lakes, and seas, to be still further spread about the surface of the new world. Countless billions died before the first black man broke through his prison walls into the light of day. Prompted by curiosity, he broke open other shells, and the peopling of Barsoom commenced. The pure strain of the blood of this first black man has remained untainted by admixture with other creatures in the race of which I am a member. But from the 16-legged worm, the first ape, and renegade black man, has sprung every other form of animal life upon Barsoom. The thorns, and he smiled maliciously as he spoke, are but the result of ages of evolution from the pure white ape of antiquity. They are a lower order still. But there is one race of true and immortal humans upon Barsoom. It is the race of black men. The tree of life is dead, but before it died, the plant men learned to detach themselves from it and roam the face of Barsoom with the other children of the first parent. Now their bisexuality permits them to reproduce themselves after the manner of true plants, but otherwise they have progressed but little in all the ages of their existence. Their actions and movements are largely matters of instinct and not guided to any great extent by reason, since the brain of a plant man is but a trifle larger than the end of your smallest finger. They live upon vegetation and the blood of animals, and their brain is just large enough to direct their movements in the direction of food, and to translate the food sensations which are carried to it from their eyes and ears. They have no sense of self-preservation, and so are entirely without fear in the face of danger. That is why they are such terrible antagonists in combat. I wondered why the black man took such pains to discourse thus at length to enemies upon the genesis of life Barsoomian. It seemed a strangely inopportune moment for a proud member of a proud race to unbend in casual conversation with a captor, especially in view of the fact that the black still lay securely bound upon the deck. It was the faintest straying of his eye beyond me for the barest fraction of a second that explained his motive for thus dragging out my interest in his truly absorbing story. He lay a little forward of where I stood at the levers, and thus he faced the stern of the vessel as he addressed me. It was at the end of his description of the plantmen that I caught his eye fixed momentarily upon something behind me. Nor could I be mistaken in the swift gleam of triumph that brightened those dark orbs for an instant. Some time before, I had reduced our speed, for we had left the Valley Dor many miles astern, and I felt comparatively safe. I turned an apprehensive glance behind me, and the sight that I saw froze the newborn hope of freedom that had been springing up within me. A great battleship, forging silent and unlighted through the dark night, loomed close astern.
End of chapter 7. Recording by Thomas Copeland. Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Copeland.
The depths of Omine. Now I realized why the black pirate had kept me engrossed with his strange tale. For miles he had sensed the approach of succor, and but for that single telltale glance, the battleship would have been directly above us in another moment. The boarding party, which was doubtless even now swinging in their harness from the ship's keel, would have swarmed our deck, placing my rising hope of escape in sudden and total eclipse. I was too old a hand in aerial warfare to be at a loss now for the right maneuver. Simultaneously I reversed the engines and dropped the little vessel a sheer 100 feet. Above my head I could see the dangling forms of the boarding party as the battleship raced over us. Then I rose at a sharp angle, throwing my speed lever to its last notch. Like a bolt from a crossbow, my splendid craft shot its steel prow straight at the whirring propellers of the giant above us. If I could but touch them, the huge bulk would be disabled for hours, and escape once more possible. At the same instant the sun shot above the horizon, disclosing 100 grim black faces peering over the stern of the battleship upon us. At sight of us, a shout of rage went up from 100 throats. Orders were shouted, but it was too late to save the giant propellers, and with a crash we rammed them. Instantly, with a shock of impact, I reversed my engine, but my prow was wedged in the hole it had made in the battleship's stern. Only a second I hung there before tearing away, but that second was amply long to swarm my deck with black devils. There was no fight. In the first place, there was no room to fight. We were simply submerged by numbers. Then, as swords menaced me, a command from Zodar stayed the hands of his fellows. "Secure them," he said, "but do not injure them." Several of the pirates already had released Zodar. He now personally attended to my disarming, and saw that I was properly bound. At least he thought that the binding was secure. It would have been, had I been a Martian, but I had to smile at the puny strands that confined my wrists. When the time came, I could snap them as they had been cotton string. The girl they bound also, and then they fastened us together. In the meantime, they had brought our craft alongside the disabled battleship, and soon we were transported to the latter's deck. Fully 1,000 black men manned the great engine of destruction. Her decks were crowded with them as they pressed forward, as far as discipline would permit, to get a glimpse of their captives. The girl's beauty elicited many brutal comments and vulgar jests. It was evident that these self-thought supermen were far inferior to the red men of Barsoom in refinement and in chivalry. My close-cropped black hair and thorn complexion were the subjects of much comment. When Zodar told his fellow nobles of my fighting ability and strange origin, they crowded about me with numerous questions. The fact that I wore the harness and metal of a thorn who had been killed by a member of my party convinced them that I was an enemy of their hereditary foes, and placed me on a better footing in their estimation. Without exception, the blacks were handsome men and well built. The officers were conspicuous through the wondrous magnificence of their resplendent trappings. Many harnesses were so encrusted with gold, platinum, silver, and precious stones as to entirely hide the leather beneath. The harness of the commanding officer was a solid mass of diamonds. Against the ebony background of his skin they blazed out with a peculiarly accentuated effulgence. The whole scene was enchanting. The handsome men, the barbaric splendor of the accoutrements, the polished skeel wood of the deck, the gloriously grained sorapus of the cabins. inlaid with priceless jewels and precious metals in intricate and beautiful design, the burnished gold of handrails, the shining metal of the guns. Fedor and I were taken below decks, where, still fast bound, we were thrown into a small compartment which contained a single porthole. As our escort left us, they barred the door behind them. We could hear the men working on the broken propellers, and from the porthole we could see that the vessel was drifting lazily toward the south. For some time neither of us spoke. Each was occupied with his own thoughts. For my part, I was wondering as to the fate of Tars Tarkas and the girl Thuvia. Even if they succeeded in eluding pursuit, they must eventually fall into the hands of either red men or green, and as fugitives from the Valley Dor, they could look for but little else than a swift and terrible death. How I wished that I might have accompanied them! It seemed to me that I could not fail to impress upon the intelligent red men of Barsoom the wicked deception that a cruel and senseless superstition had foisted upon them. Tardas Mors would believe me. Of that I was positive, and that he would have the courage of his convictions, my knowledge of his character assured me. Dejathoras would believe me. Not a doubt as to that entered my head. Then there were 1,000 of my red and green warrior friends whom I knew would face eternal damnation gladly for my sake. Like Tars Tarkas, where I led, they would follow. My only danger lay in that, should I ever escape the black pirates, it might be to fall into the hands of unfriendly red or green men. Then it would mean short shrift for me. Well, there seemed little to worry about on that score, for the likelihood of my ever escaping the blacks was extremely remote. The girl and I were linked together by a rope which permitted us to move only about 3 or 4 feet from each other. When we had entered the compartment, we had seated ourselves upon a low bench beneath the porthole. The bench was the only furniture in the room. It was of sorapus wood. The floor, ceiling, and walls were of carborundum aluminum, a light, impenetrable composition extensively utilized in the construction of Martian fighting ships. As I had sat meditating upon the future, my eyes had been riveted upon the porthole which was just level with them as I sat. Suddenly I looked toward Fedor. She was regarding me with a strange expression I had not before seen upon her face. She was very beautiful then. Instantly her white lids veiled her eyes, and I thought I discovered a delicate flush tinging her cheek. Evidently she was embarrassed at having been detected in the act of staring at a lesser creature, I thought. "Do you find the study of the lower orders interesting?" I asked, laughing. She looked up again with a nervous but relieved little laugh. "Oh, very," she said, "especially when they have such excellent profiles." It was my turn to flush, but I did not. I felt that she was poking fun at me, and I admired a brave heart that could look for humor on the road to death, and so I laughed with her. "Do you know where we are going?" she said. "To solve the mystery of the eternal hereafter, I imagine," I replied. "I am going to a worse fate than that," she said with a little shudder. "What do you mean?" "I can only guess," she replied, "since no thern damsel of all the millions that have been stolen away by black pirates during the ages they have raided our domains has ever returned to narrate her experiences among them. That they never take a man prisoner lends strength to the belief that the fate of the girls they steal is worse than death." "Is it not a just retribution?" I could not help but ask. "What do you mean?" "Do not the Therns themselves do likewise with the poor creatures who take the voluntary pilgrimage down the river of mystery? Was not Thuvia for 15 years a plaything and a slave? Is it less than just that you should suffer as you have caused others to suffer?" "You do not understand," she replied. "We Therns are a holy race. It is an honor to a lesser creature to be a slave among us. Did we not occasionally save a few of the lower orders that stupidly float down an unknown river to an unknown end, all would become the prey of the plantmen and the apes. But do you not by every means encourage the superstition among those of the outside world?" I argued. "That is the wickedest of your deeds. Can you tell me why you foster the cruel deception? All life on Barsoom, she said, is created solely for the support of the race of thorns. How else could we live, did the outer world not furnish our labor and our food? Think you that a thorn would demean himself by labor? It is true, then, that you eat human flesh? I asked in horror. She looked at me in pitying commiseration for my ignorance. Truly, we eat the flesh of the lower orders. Do not you also? The flesh of beasts, yes, I replied, but not the flesh of man. As man may eat of the flesh of beasts, so may gods eat of the flesh of man. The holy thorns are the gods of Barsoom. I was disgusted, and I imagine that I showed it. You are an unbeliever now, she continued gently, but should we be fortunate enough to escape the clutches of the black pirates and come again to the court of Matai Shang, I think that we shall find an argument to convince you of the error of your ways. And, she hesitated, perhaps we shall find a way to keep you as one of us. Again her eyes dropped to the floor, and a faint color suffused her cheek. I could not understand her meaning, nor did I for a long time. Dejothoros was wont to say that in some things I was a veritable simpleton, and I guessed that she was right. I fear that I would ill requite your father's hospitality, I answered, since the first thing that I should do were I a thorn would be to set an armed guard at the mouth of the River Iss to escort the poor deluded voyagers back to the outer world. Also should I devote my life to the extermination of the hideous plantmen and their horrible companions, the great white apes. She looked at me, really horror-struck. "No, no," she cried, "you must not say such terribly sacrilegious things. You must not even think them. Should they ever guess that you entertain such frightful thoughts, should we chance to regain the temples of the thorns, they would mete out a frightful death to you. Not even my... Again she flushed and started over. Not even I could save you." I said no more. Evidently it was useless. She was even more steeped in superstition than the Martians of the outer world. They only worshipped a beautiful hope for a life of love and peace and happiness in the hereafter. The thorns worshipped the hideous plantmen and the apes, or at least they reverenced them as the abodes of the departed spirits of their own dead. At this point, the door of our prison opened to admit Zodar. He smiled pleasantly at me, and when he smiled his expression was kindly, anything but cruel or vindictive. "Since you cannot escape under any circumstances," he said, "I cannot see the necessity for keeping you confined below. I will cut your bonds, and you may come on deck. You will witness something very interesting, and as you shall never return to the outer world, it will do no harm to permit you to see it. You will see what no other than the firstborn and their slaves know the existence of, the subterranean entrance to the Holy Land, to the real heaven of Barsoom. It will be an excellent lesson for this daughter of the thorns," he added, "for she shall see the temple of Isis, and Isis perchance shall embrace her." Fedor's head went high. "What blasphemy is this, dog of a pirate?" she cried. "Isis would wipe out your entire breed, and you ever came within sight of her temple." "You have much to learn, Thorn," replied Zodar with an ugly smile, "nor do I envy you the manner in which you will learn it." As we came on deck, I saw to my surprise that the vessel was passing over a great field of snow and ice. As far as the eye could reach in any direction, naught else was visible. There could be but one solution to the mystery. We were above the south polar ice cap. Only at the poles of Mars is there ice or snow upon the planet. No sign of life appeared below us. Evidently we were too far south even for the great fur-bearing animals, which the Martians so delight in hunting. Zodar was at my side as I stood looking out over the ship's rail. "What course?" I asked him. "A little west of south," he replied. "You will see the Oats Valley directly. We shall skirt it for a few hundred miles." "The Oats Valley!" I exclaimed. "But, man, is not there where lie the domains of the thorns from which I but just escaped?" "Yes," answered Zodar. "You crossed this ice field last night, in the long chase that you led us. The Oats Valley lies in a mighty depression at the South Pole. It is sunk thousands of feet below the level of the surrounding country, like a great round bowl. 100 miles from its northern boundary rise the Oats Mountains, which circle the inner valley of Dor, in the exact center of which lies the lost sea of Chorus. On the shore of this sea stands the golden temple of Isis in the land of the firstborn. It is there that we are bound." As I looked, I commenced to realize why it was that in all the ages only one had escaped from the Valley Dor. My only wonder was that even the one had been successful. To cross this frozen, wind-swept waste of bleak ice alone and on foot would be impossible. "Only by airboat could the journey be made," I finished aloud. "It was thus that one did escape the thorns in bygone times. But none has ever escaped the firstborn," said Zodar, with a touch of pride in his voice. We had now reached the southernmost extremity of the great ice barrier. It ended abruptly in a sheer wall thousands of feet high, at the base of which stretched a level valley, broken here and there by low rolling hills and little clumps of forest, and with tiny rivers formed by the melting of the ice barrier at its base. Once we passed far above what seemed to be a deep canyon-like rift, stretching from the ice wall on the north across the valley as far as the eye could reach. "That is the bed of the River Iss," said Zodar. "It runs far beneath the ice field and below the level of the Valley Oats, but its canyon is open here." Presently I descried what I took to be a village, and pointing it out to Zodar, asked him what it might be. "It is a village of lost souls," he answered, laughing. "This strip between the ice barrier and the mountains is considered neutral ground. Some turn off from their voluntary pilgrimage down the ice, and, scaling the awful walls of its canyon below us, stop in the valley. Also, a slave now and then escapes from the thorns and makes his way hither. They do not attempt to recapture such, since there is no escape from this outer valley, and, as a matter of fact, they fear the patrolling cruisers of the firstborn too much to venture from their own domains. The poor creatures of this outer valley are not molested by us, since they have nothing that we desire, nor are they numerically strong enough to give us an interesting fight, so we too leave them alone. There are several villages of them, but they have increased in numbers but little in many years, since they are always warring among themselves. Now we swung a little north of west, leaving the Valley of Lost Souls, and shortly I discerned over our starboard bow what appeared to be a black mountain rising from the desolate waste of ice. It was not high, and seemed to have a flat top. Zodar had left us to attend to some duty on the vessel, and Fedor and I stood alone beside the rail. The girl had not once spoken since we had been brought to the deck. "Is what he has been telling me true?" I asked her. "In part, yes," she answered. "That about the outer valley is true, but what he says of the location of the temple of Isis in the center of his country is false. If it is not false—" She hesitated. "Oh, it cannot be true, it cannot be true. For if it were true, then for countless ages have my people gone to torture and ignominious death at the hands of their cruel enemies, instead of to the beautiful life eternal that we have been taught to believe Isis holds for us. As the lesser Barsoomians of the outer world have been lured by you to the terrible Valley Dor, so it may be that the thorns themselves have been lured by the firstborn to an equally horrid fate," I suggested. "It would be a stern and awful retribution, Fedor, but a just one." "I cannot believe it," she said. "We shall see," I answered. And then we fell silent again, for we were rapidly approaching the Black Mountains, which in some indefinable way seemed linked with the answer to our problem. As we neared the dark truncated cone, the vessel's speed was diminished until we barely moved. Then we topped the crest of the mountain, and below us I saw yawning the mouth of a huge circular well, the bottom of which was lost in inky blackness. The diameter of this enormous pit was fully 1,000 feet. The walls were smooth, and appeared to be composed of a black basaltic rock. For a moment the vessel hovered motionless directly above the center of the gaping void. Then slowly she began to settle into the black chasm. Lower and lower she sank, until, as darkness enveloped us, her lights were thrown on, and in the dim halo of her own radiance, the monster battleship dropped on and on, down into what seemed to me must be the very bowels of Barsoom. For quite half an hour we descended, and then the shaft terminated abruptly in the dome of a mighty subterranean world. Below us rose and fell the billows of a buried sea. A phosphorescent radiance illuminated the scene. Thousands of ships dotted the bosom of the ocean. Little islands rose here and there to support the strange and colorless vegetation of this strange world. Slowly and with majestic grace, the battleship dropped until she rested on the water. Her great propellers had been drawn and housed during our descent of the shaft, and in their place had been run out the smaller but more powerful water propellers. As these commenced to revolve, the ship took up its journey once more, riding the new element as buoyantly and as safely as she had the air. Fedor and I were dumbfounded. Neither had either heard or dreamed that such a world existed beneath the surface of Barsoom. Nearly all the vessels we saw were warcraft. There were a few lighters and barges, but none of the great merchantmen such as ply the upper air between the cities of the outer world. "Here is the harbor of the navy of the firstborn," said a voice behind us, and turning we saw Zodar watching us with an amused smile on his lips. "This sea," he continued, "is larger than Chorus. It receives the waters of the lesser sea above it. To keep it from filling above a certain level, we have 4 great pumping stations that force the oversupply back into the reservoirs far north, from which the red men draw the water which irrigates their farmlands." A new light burst on me with this explanation. The red men had always considered it a miracle that caused great columns of water to spurt from the solid rock of their reservoir sides to increase the supply of the precious liquid which is so scarce in the outer world of Mars. Never had their learned men been able to fathom the secret of the source of this enormous volume of water. As ages passed, they had simply come to accept it as a matter of course, and ceased to question its origin. We passed several islands on which were strangely shaped circular buildings, apparently roofless, and pierced midway between the ground and their tops with small, heavily barred windows. They bore the earmarks of prisons, which were further accentuated by the armed guards who squatted on low benches without, or patrolled the short beach lines. Few of these islets contained over an acre of ground, but presently we sighted a much larger one directly ahead. This proved to be our destination, and the great ship was soon made fast against the steep shore. Zodar signaled us to follow him, and with a half-dozen officers and men, we left the battleship and approached a large oval structure a couple of 100 yards from the shore. "You shall soon see Isis," said Zodar to Fedor. "The few prisoners we take are presented to her. Occasionally she selects slaves from among them to replenish the ranks of her handmaidens. None serves Isis above a single year." And there was a grim smile on the black's lips that lent a cruel and sinister meaning to his simple statement. Fedor, though loath to believe that Isis was allied to such as these, had commenced to entertain doubts and fears. She clung very closely to me, no longer the proud daughter of the master of life and death upon Barsoom, but a young and frightened girl in the power of relentless enemies. The building which we now entered was entirely roofless. In its center was a long tank of water, set below the level of the floor like the swimming pool of a natatorium. Near one side of the pool floated an odd-looking black object. Whether it were some strange monster of these buried waters, or a queer craft, I could not at once perceive. We were soon to know, however, for, as we reached the edge of the pool directly above the thing, Zodar cried out a few words in a strange tongue. Immediately a hatch cover was raised from the surface of the object, and a black seaman sprang from the bowels of the strange craft. Zodar addressed the seaman. "Transmit to your officer," he said, "the commands of Dator Zodar. Say to him that Dator Zodar, with officers and men, escorting 2 prisoners, would be transported to the gardens of Isis, beside the Golden Temple." "Blessed be the shell of thy first ancestor, most noble Dator," replied the man. "It shall be done, even as thou sayest." And, raising both hands, palms backward, above his head, after the manner of salute which is common to all races of Barsoom, he disappeared once more into the entrails of his ship. A moment later, an officer, resplendent in the gorgeous trappings of his rank, appeared on deck and welcomed Zodar to the vessel, and in the latter's wake we filed aboard and below. The cabin in which we found ourselves extended entirely across the ship, having portholes on either side below the waterline. No sooner were all below than a number of commands were given, in accordance with which the hatch was closed and secured, and the vessel commenced to vibrate to the rhythmic purr of its machinery. "Where can we be going in such a tiny pool of water?" asked Fedor. "Not up," I replied, for I noticed particularly that while the building is roofless, it is covered with a strong metal grating. "Then where?" she asked again. "From the appearance of the craft, I judge we are going down," I replied. Fedor shuddered. For such long ages have the waters of Barsoom's seas been a thing of tradition only, that even this daughter of the thorns, born as she had been within sight of Mars' only remaining sea, had the same terror of deep water as is a common attribute of all Martians. Presently the sensation of sinking became very apparent. We were going down swiftly. Now we could hear the water rushing past the portholes, and in the dim light that filtered through them to the water beyond, the swirling eddies were plainly visible. Fedor grasped my arm. "Save me," she whispered. "Save me, and your every wish shall be granted. Anything within the power of the holy thorns to give will be yours. Fedor," she stumbled a little here, and then, in a very low voice, "Fedor already is yours." I felt very sorry for the poor child, and placed my hand over hers where it rested on my arm. I presume my motive was misunderstood, for with a swift glance about the apartment to assure herself that we were alone, she threw both her arms about my neck and dragged my face down to hers.
End of chapter 8. Recording by Thomas Copeland. Mars by Edgar Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Copeland.
Isis, goddess of life eternal. The confession of love which the girl's fright had wrung from her touched me deeply, but it humiliated me as well, since I felt that in some thoughtless word or act I had given her reason to believe that I reciprocated her affection. Never have I been much of a lady's man, being more concerned with fighting and kindred arts, which have ever seemed to me more befitting a man than mooning over a scented glove 4 sizes too small for him, or kissing a dead flower that has begun to smell like a cabbage. So I was quite at a loss as to what to do or say. 1,000 times rather face the wild hordes of the dead sea bottoms than meet the eyes of this beautiful young girl and tell her the thing that I must tell her. But there was nothing else to be done, And so I did it. Very clumsily, too, I fear. Gently I unclasped her hands from about my neck, and, still holding them in mine, I told her the story of my love for Dejathoris. That of all the women of two worlds that I had known and admired during my long life, she alone had I loved. The tale did not seem to please her. Like a tigress, she sprang panting to her feet. Her beautiful face was distorted in an expression of horrible malevolence. Her eyes fairly blazed into mine. "Dog," she hissed, "dog of a blasphemer! Think you that Fedor, daughter of Metai Shang, supplicates? She commands. What to her is your puny outer world passion for the vile creature you chose in your other life? Fedor has glorified you with her love, and you have spurned her. 10,000 unthinkably atrocious deaths could not atone for the affront that you have put upon me. The thing that you call Dejathoris shall die the most horrible of them all. You have sealed the warrant for her doom. And you shall be the meanest slave in the service of the goddess you have attempted to humiliate. Tortures and ignominy shall be heaped upon you until you grovel at my feet, asking the boon of death. In my gracious generosity I shall, at length, grant your prayer, and from the high balcony of the golden cliffs I shall watch the great white apes tear you asunder." She had it all fixed up, the whole lovely program from start to finish. It amazed me to think that one so divinely beautiful could at the same time be so fiendishly vindictive. It occurred to me, however, that she had overlooked one little factor in her revenge, and so, without any attempt to add to her discomfiture, but rather to permit her to rearrange her plans along more practical lines, I pointed to the nearest porthole. Evidently she had entirely forgotten her surroundings and her present circumstances, for a single glance at the dark swirling waters without sent her crumpled upon a low bench, where, with her face buried in her arms, she sobbed, more like a very unhappy little girl than a proud and all-powerful goddess. Down, down we continued to sink, until the heavy glass of the portholes became noticeably warm from the heat of the water without. Evidently we were very far beneath the surface crust of Mars. Presently our downward motion ceased, and I could hear the propellers swirling through the water at our stern and forcing us ahead at high speed. It was very dark down there, but the light from our portholes, and the reflection from what must have been a powerful searchlight on the submarine's nose, showed that we were forging through a narrow passage, rock-lined and tube-like. After a few minutes the propellers ceased their whirring. We came to a full stop, and then commenced to rise swiftly toward the surface. Soon the light from without increased, and we came to a stop. Zodar entered the cabin with his men. "Come," he said, and we followed him through the hatchway, which had been opened by one of the seamen. We found ourselves in a small subterranean vault, in the center of which was the pool in which lay our submarine, floating as we had first seen her, with only her black back showing. Around the edge of the pool was a level platform, and then the walls of the cave rose perpendicularly for a few feet to arch toward the center of the low roof. The walls about the ledge were pierced with a number of entrances to dimly lighted passageways. Toward one of these our captors led us, and after a short walk halted before a steel cage which lay at the bottom of a shaft rising above us as far as one could see. The cage proved to be one of the common types of elevator cars that I had seen in other parts of Barsoom. They are operated by means of enormous magnets, which are suspended at the top of the shaft. By an electrical device, the volume of magnetism generated is regulated, and the speed of the car varied. In long stretches they move at a sickening speed, especially on the upward trip, since the small force of gravity inherent to Mars results in very little opposition to the powerful force above. Scarcely had the door of the car closed behind us than we were slowing up to stop at the landing above, so rapid was our ascent of the long shaft. When we emerged from the little building which houses the upper terminus of the elevator, we found ourselves in the midst of a veritable fairyland of beauty. The combined languages of earthmen hold no words to convey to the mind the gorgeous beauties of the scene. One may speak of scarlet sward and ivory-stemmed trees decked with brilliant purple blooms, of winding walks paved with crushed rubies, with emerald, with turquoise, even with diamonds themselves, of a magnificent temple of burnished gold, hand-wrought with marvelous designs. But where are the words to describe the glorious colors that are unknown to earthly eyes? Where the mind or the imagination that can grasp the gorgeous scintillations of unheard-of rays as they emanate from the thousand nameless jewels of Barsoom? Even my eyes, for long years accustomed to the barbaric splendors of a Martian jedak's court, were amazed at the glory of the scene. Fedor's eyes were wide in amazement. "The temple of Isis," she whispered, half to herself. Zodar watched us with his grim smile, partly of amusement and partly malicious gloating. The gardens swarmed with brilliantly trapped black men and women. Among them moved red and white females, serving their every want. The palaces of the outer world and the temples of the thorns had been robbed of their princesses and goddesses, that the blacks might have their slaves. Through this scene we moved toward the temple. At the main entrance we were halted by a cordon of armed guards. Zodar spoke a few words to an officer who came forward to question us. Together they entered the temple, where they remained for some time. When they returned, it was to announce that Isis desired to look upon the daughter of Metai Sham, and the strange creature from another world who had been a prince of Helium. Slowly we moved through endless corridors of unthinkable beauty, through magnificent apartments and noble halls. At length we were halted in a spacious chamber in the center of the temple. One of the officers who had accompanied us advanced to a large door in the further end of the chamber. Here he must have made some sort of signal, for immediately the door opened, and another richly trapped courtier emerged. We were then led up to the door, where we were directed to get down on our hands and knees with our backs toward the room we were to enter. The doors were sprung open, and after being cautioned not to turn our heads under penalty of instant death, we were commanded to back into the presence of Isis. Never have I been in so humiliating a position in my life, and only my love for Dejathoras, and the hope which still clung to me that I might again see her, kept me from rising to face the goddess of the firstborn, and go down to my death like a gentleman, facing my foes, and with their blood mingling with mine. After we had crawled in this disgusting fashion for a matter of a couple of 100 feet, we were halted by our escort. "Let them rise," said a voice behind us, a thin, wavering voice, yet one that had evidently been accustomed to command for many years. "Rise," said our escort, "but do not face toward Isis." "The woman pleases me," said the thin, wavering voice again, after a few moments of silence. "She shall serve me the allotted time. The man, you may return to the isle of Fedor, which lies against the northern shore of the Sea of Omin. Let the woman turn and look upon Isis, knowing that those of the lower orders who gaze upon the holy vision of her radiant face survive the blinding glory but a single year." I watched Fedor from the corner of my eye. She paled to a ghastly hue. Slowly, very slowly, she turned, as though drawn by some invisible yet irresistible force. She was standing quite close to me, so close that her bare arm touched mine as she finally faced Isis, goddess of life eternal. I could not see the girl's face as her eyes rested for the first time on the supreme deity of Mars, but felt the shudder that ran through her in the trembling flesh of the arm that touched mine. It must be dazzling loveliness indeed, thought I, to cause such emotion in the breast of so radiant a beauty as Fedor, daughter of Matai Shah. Let the woman remain. Remove the man. Go. Thus spoke Isis, and the heavy hand of the officer fell upon my shoulder. In accordance with his instructions, I dropped to my hands and knees once more and crawled from the presence. It had been my first audience with deity, but I am free to confess that I was not greatly impressed, other than with the ridiculous figure I cut scrambling about on my marrow bones. Once without the chamber, the doors closed behind us, and I was bid to rise. Zodar joined me, and together we slowly retraced our steps toward the gardens. "You spared my life when you easily might have taken it," he said, after we had proceeded some little way in silence, "and I would aid you, if I might. I can help to make your life here more bearable, but your fate is inevitable. You may never hope to return to the outer world." "What will be my fate?" I asked. "That will depend largely upon Isis. So long as she does not send for you and reveal her face to you, you may live on for years in as mild a form of bondage as I can arrange for you." "Why should she send for me?" I asked. "The men of the lower orders she often uses for various purposes of amusement. Such a fighter as you, for example, would render fine sport in the monthly rites of the temple. There are men pitted against men and against beasts for the edification of Isis and the replenishment of her larder." "She eats human flesh?" I asked, not in horror, however, for since my recently acquired knowledge of the holy thorns, I was prepared for anything in this still less accessible heaven, where all was evidently dictated by a single omnipotence, where ages of narrow fanaticism and self-worship had eradicated all the broader humanitarian instincts that the race might once have possessed. They were a people drunk with power and success, looking upon the other inhabitants of Mars as we look upon the beasts of the field and the forest. Why, then, should they not eat of the flesh of the lower orders, whose lives and characters they no more understood than we do the inmost thoughts and sensibilities of the cattle we slaughter for our earthly tables? She eats only the flesh of the best bred of the holy thorns and the red Barsoomians. The flesh of the others goes to our boards. The animals are eaten by the slaves. She also eats other dainties." I did not understand then that there lay any special significance in his reference to other dainties. I thought the limit of ghoulishness already had been reached in the recitation of Isis' menu. I still had much to learn as to the depths of cruelty and bestiality to which omnipotence may drag its possessor. We had about reached the last of the many chambers and corridors which led to the gardens when an officer overtook us. "Isis would look again upon this man," he said. "The girl has told her that he is of wondrous beauty, and of such prowess that alone he slew 7 of the firstborn, and with his bare hands took Zodar captive, binding him with his own harness." Zodar looked uncomfortable. Evidently he did not relish the thought that Isis had learned of his inglorious defeat. Without a word he turned, and we followed the officer once again to the closed doors before the audience chamber of Isis, goddess of life eternal. Here the ceremony of entrance was repeated. Again Isis bid me rise. For several minutes all was silent as the tomb. The eyes of deity were appraising me. Presently the thin, wavering voice broke the stillness, repeating in a sing-song drone the words which for countless ages had sealed the doom of numberless victims. "Let the man turn and look upon Isis, knowing that those of the lower orders who gaze upon the holy vision of her radiant face survive the blinding glory but a single year. I turned as I had been bid, expecting such a treat as only the revealment of divine glory to mortal eyes might produce. What I saw was a solid phalanx of armed men between myself and a dais supporting a great bench of carved sorapus wood. On this bench, or throne, squatted a female black. She was evidently very old. Not a hair remained upon her wrinkled skull. With the exception of 2 yellow fangs, she was entirely toothless. On either side of her thin hawk-like nose, her eyes burned from the depths of horribly sunken sockets. The skin of her face was seamed and creased with 1,000,000 deep-cut furrows. Her body was as wrinkled as her face, and as repulsive. Emaciated arms and legs, attached to a torso which seemed to be mostly distorted abdomen, completed the holy vision of her radiant beauty. Surrounding her were a number of female slaves, among them Fedor, white and trembling. "This is the man who slew 7 of the firstborn, and bare-handed bound Dator Zodar with his own harness?" asked Isis. "Most glorious vision of divine loveliness it is," replied the officer who stood at my side. "Produce Dator Zodar," she commanded. Zodar was brought from the adjoining room. Isis glared at him, a baleful light in her hideous eyes. "And such as you are a Dator of the firstborn?" she squealed. "For the disgrace you have brought upon the immortal race, you shall be degraded to a rank below the lowest. No longer be you a Dator, but forevermore a slave of slaves, to fetch and carry for the lower orders that serve in the gardens of Isis. Remove his harness. Cowards and slaves wear no trappings." Zodar stood stiffly erect. Not a muscle twitched, nor a tremor shook his giant frame as a soldier of the guard roughly stripped his gorgeous trappings from him. "Begone!" screamed the infuriated little old woman. "Begone! But instead of the light of the gardens of Isis, let you serve as a slave of this slave who conquered you in the prison on the Isle of Fedor in the Sea of Omin. Take him away out of the sight of my divine eyes." Slowly and with high-held head, the proud Zodar turned and stalked from the chamber. Isis rose and turned to leave the room by another exit. Turning to me, she said, "You shall be returned to Fedor for the present. Later, Isis will see the manner of your fighting. Go." Then she disappeared, followed by her retinue. Only Fedor lagged behind, and as I started to follow my guard toward the garden, the girl came running after me. "Oh, do not leave me in this terrible place," she begged.
"Forgive the things I said to you, my prince. I did not mean them. Only take me away with you. Let me share your imprisonment on Fedor." Her words were an almost incoherent volley of thoughts, so rapidly she spoke. "You did not understand the honor that I did you. Among the thorns there is no marriage or giving in marriage, as among the lower orders of the outer world. We might have lived together forever in love and happiness. We have both looked upon Isis, and in a year we die. Let us live that year at least together, in what measure of joy remains for the doomed."
"If it was difficult for me to understand you, Fedor," I replied, "can you not understand that possibly it is equally difficult for you to understand the motives, the customs, and the social laws that guide me? I do not wish to hurt you, nor to seem to undervalue the honor which you have done me. But the thing you desire may not be. Regardless of the foolish belief of the peoples of the outer world, or of Holy Thurn, or Ebon Firstborn, I am not dead. While I live, my heart beats for but one woman, the incomparable Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium. When death overtakes me, my heart shall have ceased to beat, but What comes after that I know not. And in that I am as wise as Metai Shang, master of life and death upon Barsoom, or Isis, goddess of life eternal." Fedor stood looking at me intently for a moment. No anger showed in her eyes this time, only a pathetic expression of hopeless sorrow. "I do not understand," she said, and, turning, walked slowly in the direction of the door through which Isis and her retinue had passed. A moment later she had passed from my sight.
End of chapter 9. Recording by Thomas Copeland.